People think injustice comes crashing in like a siren, loud and obvious, but that's not how it usually happens. It slips in, quietly, smiles at you, hides behind rules, and waits to see if you'll shrink. And that's exactly what happened on that flight. Because the moment wasn't loud at first, it was small, almost forgettable, until it wasn't. My son Caleb was 2 years old, barely old enough to swing his legs off the seat, barely old enough to understand hunger, not old enough to understand why a grown adult would look at him like he didn't belong. And all he did was reach for a cup of juice. That was it. Nothing dramatic, just a kid reaching forward with both hands, eyes wide, stomach already hurting from the long morning. And he said, "Can I have that? Please." Real soft, real polite, the way kids do when they're trying to be brave. And the flight attendant snapped the tray back so fast it rattled. Juice spilled onto the carpet, and she said, "We don't serve premium meals to upgrade passengers." And then quieter, sharper, like a blade sliding in. "Sit back." Yeah, that happened. The cabin went dead quiet. You could feel it, that weird silence where everyone knows something crossed a line, but nobody knows who's supposed to speak first. And Caleb just froze, like someone hit pause on him mid-reach. His little stomach actually growled loud enough for the woman across the aisle to hear, and his face changed confusion first, then that slow burn kids get when they're trying to figure out what rule they broke, and he looked down at his hands like the answer might be there. Earlier that day had been special for him, not because of the leather seats or the silverware. He'd seen nice things before. What made him excited was the attention, people smiling at him, asking him what he wanted, treating him like he mattered, you know what I mean? He wasn't thinking about class or money or status, he was thinking about kindness. I was sitting right next to him, tablet in my hands, posture, calm, face, neutral, and from the outside it probably looked like I wasn't paying attention, but my grip tightened so hard my knuckles went white. Because you learn something when you grow up being underestimated. You learn to wait. You learn that people tell on themselves if you give them enough rope. The cart kept moving, and the attendant's tone changed instantly when she spoke to the next passenger. Warm smile, soft voice, chicken or pasta, sir. Then another, apple juice or orange. And Caleb watched closely, sitting up straighter each time because kids notice patterns faster than adults do. And when she reached him, she didn't pause, didn't hesitate. She looked him dead in the eye, tucked the last tray behind her back, and walked on. At first he thought she forgot, so he waited. Then he leaned forward again, real careful, not wanting to bother anyone, and said, "Excuse me, I didn't get to pick." And that's when the smile disappeared completely, like it was never real to begin with. She said louder now, "I told you already, this is first-class service. We don't provide luxury meals for seat fillers." And Caleb whispered back, "But I'm sitting here. This is my seat." And she tilted her head, lips curling just a little, and said, "Policy is policy, sweetheart. Maybe next time your family should buy the right ticket instead of pretending." Those words landed heavy, heavier than they should have, and you could feel the cabin shift, people looking at each other, that older woman across the aisle stiffening a guy near the window, slowly lowering his phone, and Caleb's cheeks burned. He stared at his hands again and asked, "Did I do something wrong?" Real quiet, and she ignored him completely, handed an extra dessert to the businessman behind him, who didn't even ask, made sure Caleb saw it. And that's when I closed my tablet, not hard, not dramatic, just a soft click. But in that silence it sounded loud. "Hey buddy," I said, leaning close. "You okay?" He nodded, even though his lip trembled, and said, "I'm hungry." And I reached into my carry-on and pulled out a sealed pack of crackers, the kind you carry just in case, handed it to him without a word. And almost instantly she was back, like she'd been waiting. "Sir, outside food isn't allowed in first class," she said, arms crossed, and I looked at her calmly and said, "These were purchased in your terminal, sealed for a child," and she said, "Put it away or I'll confiscate it." That's the thing about power. Sometimes it's not about rules at all, it's about control, and you can watch it happen in real time. People inventing policies just to feel important, and the air in that cabin felt heavier, like everyone was holding their breath. Caleb looked up at her and asked, "Why are you being mean to me?" And she leaned closer than necessary and muttered, "Kids need to learn where they belong." Then louder, "This isn't daycare." And I took the crackers back slowly and said to my son, "Sometimes people show you exactly who they are, and sometimes they forget who they're talking to." That's when the woman across the aisle spoke up, held out her own snack and said, "You can have mine, sweetheart." And before Caleb could reach it, the attendant stepped in, physically blocking her. "Ma'am, sharing food violates safety protocols," and the woman snapped back. "Since when?" And the attendant's voice sharpened. "This cabin is reserved for a certain standard. Some passengers don't meet it, and phones started coming out screens glowing because cruelty hates witnesses. Caleb looked around overwhelmed and said, "But my dad bought my ticket," and she sneered. "Then sit down and be quiet," and the silence that followed was thick, heavy, uncomfortable, until the woman stood up and said, "That's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen on a flight," and the attendant snapped, "Sit down or security will meet you at the gate." And that's when I stood. Slowly, calmly, no anger, just disappointment, the kind that doesn't yell, the kind that ends things. "What's your name?" I asked, and she laughed nervously and said, "You don't have authority over me." And I said, "I need your employee ID. I want to make sure I spell it correctly." And she scoffed. "My name is irrelevant," and I smiled just a little and said, "My name is Marcus Hale. I'm the CEO of this airline." Yeah, that happened. The cabin gasped, like all the air rushed out at once, and I continued pulling out my phone. "This aircraft is my responsibility, and for the last 40 minutes you've humiliated a child on my property," and I tapped the screen. "I need ground operations and HR at the gate. We have a personnel issue in cabin 1, and she went pale, like she finally realized the story flipped, and she wasn't the one holding the pen anymore. "You denied a minor food, invented policies, spoke discriminatory language in front of witnesses. I said, voice steady, 'You're terminated effective upon landing,' and Caleb tugged my sleeve and asked, 'Does that mean she can't be mean anymore?' And I knelt down and said, 'It means actions matter, son.'" You'd think that would be the end, clean and simple, but life doesn't work like that, does it? From the back of the cabin, a man stood and said, "Funny hearing that from you. Maybe check your own company culture." And I turned and asked who he was. And he said he was someone who watched people like my son get overlooked. And I nodded slowly and said, "I remember you. You weren't overlooked. You were let go for the same lack of integrity we saw today." And I turned back to my son and said, "The world isn't fair, but sometimes it corrects itself." As the plane landed, the cabin buzzed, conversations, arguments, phones, uploading opinions, forming, some people saying it was justice, others saying it was abuse of power. And that's where I want to stop and ask you something, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. If someone uses authority to harm and another uses authority to stop them, are those really the same thing, or is the difference character? Because silence always sides with power until someone decides it won't. So tell me what you think. Was this accountability or something else? Have you ever seen something like this happen, and what did you do, or what do you wish you had done? Drop it in the comments. Let's talk about it, because these stories don't matter unless we're